With a rising divorce rate, higher numbers of single parents and increasing levels of juvenile crime, politicians of both the right and the left believe the traditional family unit is in crisis. Our Home Affairs correspondent Robert Parker has been speaking to leading authorities on social affairs and reports now on whether it is possible to turn the clock back to the golden era of family life.
Marriage in the 1950s. A wedding in the good old days when family life seemed to be so much more stable. In this idealised picture, Dad was a contented breadwinner, with Mum at home raising the kids. And the grandparents always seemed to be on hand. When John Major talks of going back to basics, it's this kind of picture that's conjured up in many people's minds.
Come on, get up.
But for some families in Britain today, the reality is utterly different. Linda Green lives on the Pennywell estate in Sunderland. She's in the process of getting divorced and is now raising 3 children on her own, living on various state benefits which add up to about £100 a week. Like many mothers in this situation, she'd like to work, but she can't afford the childcare. She's doing her very best to raise the children, but it's not easy.
It's very hard. Basically, I haven't got the money to give the children, you know, what they want. When the dad was with us, they were out, you know, they were going to the pictures, swimming, and I just haven't got the money now to do that. You know, so it's, in a way the children are suffering.
In this area of Sunderland, nearly a third of all children under 16 are being raised by lone parents. Over the country as a whole, nearly a third of all marriages now end in divorce. And with so many children now born and raised outside of stable relationships, there's growing concern about an apparent collapse in family life. And the results of these kinds of statistics seem all too apparent. This is the shopping centre on the Pennywell estate at 9 o'clock last Monday. Outside the post office, families, including single mothers and their children, queue for benefits. Here there's no surprise that more and more young people are going into crime. Last year there were more than 31,000 crimes in Sunderland alone.
The people's going out thieving. There's 5-year-olds going in shops nicking because they can't have the money off the mother, they just go on and pinching it. It just shows you from, well, people at Pennywell School, let me tell you, they're in shops pinching from morning till night. And they get away with it because they're underage. It just shows you.
So what's causing so many families to disintegrate? We've spoken to some of the country's leading thinkers on the subject. What is the reason for family breakdowns? And can John Major impose his new values on 90s Britain?
Cohabitation's on the increase all the time. Marriage is declining. Divorce is rising. Separation is rising. Crime is rising. And generally speaking, the state of the schools, especially in the inner cities, is declining. Now all of that adds up to a lousy society.
Our potential to relate as adults is hugely determined by our childhood experiences. So that if you have insecure childhoods, you are likely to have insecure marriages. So the more children today who have insecurity in their family backgrounds will know for certain that they will reap the harvest of that insecurity in the next generation of marriages.
On the Pennywell estate, a neighbourhood centre is trying to help families with problems. It's run by local women who try and provide support for mothers.
We're trying to alleviate some of the stress that's placed upon families by like society today, really. We're trying to tackle some of the problems head on.
And although it's women in areas like this that are trying to do something about the problem, ironically, it's the changing role of women in society that's seen as one of the factors underlying today's difficulties.
The old idea, and work is all premised on the old idea of man being the breadwinner and women being the homemaker. That idea is looking really time warped now, because women are having to be the breadwinners. They're getting the new jobs, and the new jobs, alas, are not the jobs for the most part that bring in very much bread. So suddenly we've got this real strain on relationships, it seems to me. I mean, all sorts of things strain relationships, but I think this is clearly one of them. The economic strains about the not being enough money to pay the bills. The strains on, well, I thought I was a breadwinner and you were the homemaker, and suddenly that is changing.
The Demos Group, an independent new think tank, has recently published a pamphlet by a leading American sociologist saying this and other factors has had a huge impact on children.
During the 60s and 70s, no one really forecast that as women moved out of the home and into work, men wouldn't change their behaviour at all. Men would still put all their energies into work and into careers. And the effect of those two things together is a massive deficit of time. And in America, it's estimated that the number of hours spent each week by parents typically has halved since the mid-60s. And it's estimated as a roughly similar figure for the UK.
Lack of jobs, or the prospect of them, undoubtedly puts family life under stress. In Sunderland, the shipbuilding industry, on which the prosperity of generations of families was based, has now gone. Even Nissan, the major new employer in the region, announced last week that it's looking for redundancies. Unemployment on the Pennywell estate is over 33%, and there are many children who've never seen their fathers work. It's not surprising that this stresses family life. What's perhaps more surprising is that there are similar problems for those in work.
Well, the great problem in Britain at the moment is that some people have far too much work, not enough time to devote to other pursuits, to looking after their children, and other people have far too much time on their hands and perversely don't have the resources perhaps to look after their children very well, and which is why you can't talk about the family and the problems of the family without talking about employment. And the days of the great halcyon family, which politicians often talk about in the 50s and 60s, was an era of full employment.
So what are the answers to these difficult problems? None of our experts feel John Major's notions of somehow going back to basics is the best way to go forward. Instead, they think that a dramatically different set of policies needs to be pursued.
There never is any possibility of return to a golden age in any society. The world moves on all the time. So the idea of going back to an idealised version of what life was like in the 50s, or for that matter in the 30s, is really not on anybody's serious political agenda. If it is, they're just wasting their time. What you have to do all the time is to look forward, not back.
In Pennywell, the neighbourhood centre provides childcare for mothers who are either working or need time for other tasks. Our experts all think that both government and employers need to become much more family-friendly, providing high-quality childcare.
We need a childcare provision structure both through employers but also through people funding their own childcare, which actually makes it of a quality needed. Because if you don't invest resources in anything, you can guarantee the outputs will be substandard, and that's certainly the case with childcare.
Professor Whitfield, who's been advising Number 10, says that there needs to be a huge programme of education, not sex education, but in human relationships. And he also thinks there's a case for making divorce harder.
It's my conviction that perhaps half of those who get divorced do so against their own best interest when looked in the long term. And I believe, yes, we could halve our divorce rate by the choices of people who at the moment are not very much helped to hang in a difficult relationship while many of the problems are sorted out, as they so often can be.
We have been going 180 degrees wrong in the last 15 years or so with respect to both economic and social policy. The whole thing needs to be turned round in the direction of emphasising over and over again that the main business of life for politicians is to create a set of circumstances which will increase, not reduce, the quality of the next generation.
Today on the Pennywell estate in Sunderland, the young men play football. In the good old days, they all had work. If John Major is to succeed in his quest for family values, his critics say he will have to change many of
backhanders. Tonight, Robert Parker reports on the background to a case that has remained largely hidden from public view.
Gordon Foxley is a man, it seems, who hates being photographed. For weeks, the most corrupt civil servant ever to be uncovered has eluded the attempts of several television companies to get pictures of him. And when he was finally filmed in woods near his house, he wasn't pleased.
Get up here. You are not. You are. Prefacing. You are leaving. I will leave now. Henry, the police.
This all took place near Gordon Foxley's house just outside Henley-on-Thames in Berkshire. An expensive house he'd bought in the 1960s when he was a low-ranking civil servant at the Ministry of Defence. Nobody seemed to think it odd that a man in his position, from an ordinary background in Liverpool, could afford such a house in one of the most expensive parts of England. According to the police, Foxley's money bought at least 5 other properties like this one in Pangbourne in Berkshire, complete with its own stables. Another house in Henley called Copp's Hill, also complete with land around it. And this weekend retreat at West Dean in Wiltshire. Altogether, the prosecution say his total assets are worth in the region of £2 million, which the prosecution now want confiscated.
A middle-ranking civil servant was leading the life of a king on a modest wage. It was known within the MOD that he had a lavish lifestyle, but yet it would appear that no one ever asked the question, how could he afford to live in that way?
Somewhat surprisingly, Gordon Foxley's various court appearances, including the latest today, have been paid for out of public funds through legal aid. He's always denied owning more than one property. Gordon Foxley had work from this Ministry of Defence building in Southwark Street in South London in the Ammunitions Procurement Department. Having trained as an engineer and worked in the nuclear industry, he joined the department in 1964. He became assistant director from 1974 to 1984. And for the 6 months before he retired in August 1984, he was director of the department, responsible for all the ammunition supplied to the Royal Navy and the Army. But even the £20,000 a year salary he retired on as a senior civil servant could not have financed his lifestyle. For the last 5 years he worked here. From 1979 to 1984, Foxley is estimated to have awarded at least £40 million worth of corrupt contracts to 3 foreign firms. Foxley is convicted of having received £1.6 million in backhanders in return for these contracts. But the police believe the sums could be much larger, and that he was on the take much earlier, from the late 1960s. As well as riches way beyond the dreams of those in his position, Gordon Foxley's corruption is said to have had another consequence. This is the Royal Ordnance Factory at Blackburn in Lancashire, which used to be one of the main manufacturers of ammunition fuses. 20 years ago, it employed more than 3,000 people, most of them highly skilled. Today, the workforce is only a tenth of that, with further cuts likely, and with much of the factory now sold off to Barratt's the house builder. Former senior managers, as well as today's workforce, say that the major single cause of their decline is the fact that Foxley corruptly gave away to foreign firms work they could and should have done.
What makes me very unhappy is the human devastation that Blackburn in particular has suffered. This used to be the largest employer in the town, and everybody here has assumed that the job losses have been down in the main to a downturn in defence spending. And when we find that it's been